Good morning. It's Saturday. I'm in the office. You know what that means. The Saturday Morning Hustle podcast, out working the competition while they still sleep. And today we're going to talk about, instead of talking about success, which is typically what we talk about on this podcast, we're going to talk about how to screw up that success quick and easy. We're going to tell you what will trip you up, and so you can avoid it and do not just better, but great with this. So the idea today is the easiest way to screw up success is by failing to pay attention to details. That's the key to whether you're going to be successful or not. You can do the big stuff. You can establish your brand. You can have great marketing. You can have great brick and mortar. You can have great presence. You can do all kinds of things, but little things in the transaction act itself, whether it's customer service, whether it's your sales team, whether it's what is being supplied is meeting the expectation that you've set, etc. Little things, leaving out the salt and pepper, not putting the ketchup in when I ask for it, not taking the tomatoes off my burger I ask you to skip, not being on time, extended periods of not being able to deliver when the expectation is you can't, et cetera, et cetera. All of these things are little details that add up to consumers losing confidence in your brand. So we're going to talk today all about how to avoid the big screw up of lack of attention to detail. And we are going to talk about how to do it well, so well that you can actually build brand loyalty with that attention to detail. And the worst thing about a business failing at the small stuff, failing to pay attention to the details, the little things that shouldn't be an issue but become issues with the consumer is because these are small things, small details that you have control over. They're not big things such as when prices change or the hours of the day or things in technology or government or weather or anything like this. These are small things such as actually listening to the consumer, actually having staff, employees, people in the process who care, and not simply a transaction, but someone who's trying to create a business relationship with the person on the other end. And if you think about it, if you put yourself in someone else's shoes, you also want to be treated that way when you're the consumer as well. So why wouldn't you go that extra mile to make sure that the consumers who do business with you, your audience, the people who end up paying you money for your product or service, or employing you, or any other business relationship, if you would not like it when they do this to you, then they definitely don't like it when you do it to them. So first and foremost is that you don't want to frustrate your audience, your consumer, by missing the details, by missing the little things, by failing to meet the expectation that you have set. We, as consumers, want you to try harder. We want you to care about us as the customer, as the consumer. We want you to have empathy for us. We want you to have understanding. And it doesn't matter if you were the owner of the business or an entry-level employee who just started yesterday. If we're interfacing as consumers with you as a representative as an agent of the business, there is an expectation that you will perform at the level of the brand itself and what general consumers expect. That's all anyone wants, is we simply want everyone involved in the process to be professional. I mean, slow down, take your time, do your job correctly, pay attention, be empathetic, act as if you were giving a transaction to yourself or someone you care about so that you complete the transaction as expected, not skipping the small stuff. And I mentioned a couple of small items earlier that might be considered attention to detail. Seem like small things, but they start to add up, such as missing something from your order or not the order not being in the preference that you expected it to be, something is cooked wrong, overcooked, or something added or subtracted that wasn't supposed to be, etc. These are small things, but they do add up. And I'm not talking about someone who loses their mind because you missed one detail, but typically that detail and another detail and another detail can lead to an overall impression of your business. Have you ever walked into a business and the staff looked aggravated to be there? Like they were bothered that they had to stop talking to each other or stop being on their phone in order to take your order or to transact with you. It doesn't feel very good at all, does it? So why would you let your staff act that way? Missing items, wrong items, the speed in which you deliver something, again, meeting expectation or failing to. If you're in a drive-through, the expectation is that it's going to come very quickly. If you're in a fine dining restaurant or a high-end retailer, you can take your time with the speed of the transaction to a point. Again, it depends on paying attention to interaction with the consumer and all of the other details. Same time, though, if your brand is a luxury brand or something that's considered more high-end, your facility had better be clean, your staff had better be well-trained, then all of the other expectations are higher because you have set that expectation higher. So again, set and meet expectation is the key. That's all you have to do. The failure in details undermines the concept that you establish when you set that expectations with your marketing, with your advertising, with your promotions, anything you did to get someone to become a consumer, to come to your business, to pay attention to your brand. That comes apart when you don't follow that concept all the way through and meet those expectations that you expect. So recently I had an issue in a drive-through. Fast food drive-through, was traveling, needed something quick, wasn't being very picky, definitely didn't have great expectations. It's drive-through fast food, right? But it still was much longer, much more frustrating, and a serious lack of empathy. And in fact, seeing the actual frustration of the staff who were working the drive-through, they obviously were struggling. They were obviously having a bad day, but they let that be apparent to me as the consumer. It was very obvious that they were having a bad day, and they sort of took it out on me as a consumer, which not only made me disappointed in the transaction, it made me very disappointed to the point of not wanting to go back, and not even just that singular location, but potential locations of the same brand. So they didn't just have one bad day, they had the potential to eliminate a consumer for life. So little things like that are why you can't allow the details to seep into your process, because you don't know how deep the transaction goes, how deep the continuation of the thought process, the idea of your brand goes. And it is super simple to torpedo a brand that you've built 10 years building with 10 seconds of a poorly trained, unempathetic employee not wanting to do their job, or a transaction that doesn't meet expectations. All of these things happen when the details are missed. So how do you make sure that you don't miss the details? How do we fix this problem? How do we avoid this problem? How do we make sure that we do not fall into this trap? So the number one is obvious, right? It's training. Very quickly training your staff, but not just the basics of training, not in going through a memorization of a set of rules, handing someone a employee handbook, or doing something else that is the basic element of training, but actual leadership from the people who are doing the training, engagement of your employees, paying attention to what they are actually taking on in great traits, the things that they're doing poorly in bad traits, etc., and actual interaction and development of your staff, of your team, at every aspect of the job, specifically starting at the small, easy stuff. Those things that consumers would expect you to do, such as keeping your facility clean, being in uniform, being on time, being attentive, attempting your best attempt to get orders correct or transactions achieved correctly, taking care of people's money and credit card information, etc. All of these things are the expectation of consumers. You have to start there with training, but it also comes from the leadership, the people doing the training, not simply showing people steps and routines, but having protocols of how to meet expectations, how to do a better job, and having that idea of put yourself in their shoes, or what kind of transaction would you do if this was your mother or someone else that you cared about greatly. Having those ideas come from the leadership, from the top, through a training and retraining and continual training process. How to eliminating mistakes comes from being able to show someone that they've made a mistake or that they could do something better, and it's delivered in a way that they will receive it correctly. It's not something that is essentially criticism or doing something so that you can get people in trouble, maybe eventually fire them or not give them the next raise that they're looking for, but instead constructive criticism that's delivered correctly and then received correctly because your leadership and your training programs do that. They set up that scenario. So not simply a follow the instructions in the book type training, but a beginning to develop new leaders in your business, people who are invested in your business process, people who want to do better, who want the consumer to be happy, who want to have continued business success because they are a part of that continued success. Developing team members, not just employees, is one of the quickest and best ways to make sure that you avoid those small mistakes because they will put themselves into the work. They will have ownership of the process. They'll be coachable. And they'll also be able to work independently. So you don't have to be there and be on top of them all the time to make sure they're hitting the small things, make sure that they're not missing the details. They will do that if they've been trained correctly and leadership is developed through the process. Their understanding of constructive criticism because it's delivered correctly. Don't criticize your staff, educate your staff, engage your team, build a system. And then through that process, your corporate culture will come through as well. And it's something that needs to be organic. Corporate culture definitely needs to become organic. There are things from the top. There are mission statements and ideas of what the business is, what the leadership stands for, the type of employees you want to have. But the training process, the corporate culture process is organic from the bottom up, meeting those expectations. If you provide your staff with the tools, you provide them with training. If you give them leadership roles, they will take these things on. They will avoid the small mistakes and do a better job, ultimately meeting all expectations because you have empowered them and engaged them as team members, as partners, not simply someone who does what you tell them to because you're giving them a paycheck. A sense of ownership, pride, even opportunity to advance and to do better in the business itself. That next raise comes from them doing a really good job. They will pay attention to the details. The big stuff is easy. You have the infrastructure in place. You have the physical structure. You have all the things in place for an employee to achieve success. If you have engaged them to be successful employees, they will go that extra mile. They will do the small stuff. They will put themselves in the consumer's shoes in order to better understand the process, be better at it, and then be seen as better at it by their leadership team, by the superiors in the organization. So it's not a simple training exercise. It is a training philosophy, a protocol, a development of team members, and the attention to detail comes from the top. When the boss pays attention to the details, when leadership rewards people who do the small stuff, when you go past the big things into the small things, when it comes to praise, to reward, to your training process, to not calling out people because they're failing, but calling out people when they're doing a great job, you can develop a team that will avoid the small mistakes. It all starts internally. The communication, the thought process, how it's going to work, why it's important. And this is something people miss a lot too. Explaining to your staff why it's important that the small things are done. why it's important that timing happens the way it does, that the uniform is the way it is, that your systems in place, your protocols, all of this, why it exists, how you learn the lesson, how it benefits the consumer, because ultimately the consumer, if it doesn't benefit them, they won't come back, we won't have a business, and how the employee in their role can help the business, promote the business, do great things for the business that will then result in better sales, better economics, the potential for them to make more money or to move up into the organization, as opposed to them simply being an employee, collecting a paycheck, watching the clock, not caring that the transactions happen as well as possible and letting the details slide. The small stuff will slide when employees are not engaged, when they do not feel part of the team, when they don't understand why a process exists, when they don't understand why a system exists, they don't understand why you're doing what you're doing because you haven't educated them and engaged them as a leader, then they're not going to put that effort in. They're simply going to watch the clock, get their paycheck, and go home. That is where mistakes happen. That's where the small stuff falls down. That's where the details get left behind because your employees are not engaged. So it's starting internally, training your employees, building actual corporate culture, not just lip surface to corporate culture, will create better results. Those results will add up to the details, to the small stuff, to the big stuff. So that is how you avoid the mistakes of lacking attention to detail. That's how you turn this around and you make what is a potential negative for your business a positive. That's the lesson today for this Saturday morning hustle. So appreciate you guys, of course, tuning in and listening for the past 15, 16 minutes or so. Appreciate you guys very much, like we do every week. Make sure that you listen to the podcast each and every week. It's on iTunes, it's on Anchor, it's on Spotify, it's on iHeartRadio, it's on Podchaser. The video is on YouTube. There's a behind the scenes, right over here is a camera with the behind the scenes on my IGTV account too, the Kyle Golding on Instagram. You can check that out as well. Anywhere you find great podcast, behind the scenes videos, stream and subscribe, leave a review, leave a comment, tell a friend, maybe even go to SaturdayMorningHustle.com, get yourself some swag, whether it is the Saturday Morning Hustle official t-shirt, Entrepreneur AF, coffee and donuts. We got all kinds of swag there for you at SaturdayMorningHustle.com. So check that out. Also, make sure you check out the special edition, limited series, balance series episode that's out now, episode 6, all about balancing how much a boss should be hands-on or hands-off. I call it the boss should always make the coffee or the boss should never make the coffee. You can check that out anywhere you find this podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Anchor app, Podchaser, etc. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Saturday Morning Hustle. It's Saturday. We're in the office, outworking the competition. See you soon.
Saturday Morning Hustle. Saturday